So welcome to this week's episode of Tree Lady Talks. Well, I wonder how you got into your career. We've got a great listenership, but I'll tell you how I got into mine: volunteering. So at the age of 16, I needed a cheap holiday and I was going to be a brilliant astrophysicist. Way! Thank God that didn't happen. So I went on a conservation volunteer holiday, the then BTCV or TCV as it is now, and I loved it. I was suddenly with all these strangers on a hillside in the Lake District and camping, and it was rough and ready, and I thought I found my tribe. And so I went on to do many more. And so I'm just delighted, just funny, I've just had a wasp just come into my face. I thought I can't kill that on a nature podcast. Anyway, so we'll probably keep that in. So volunteering shaped my life. It changed my career path. And also, some of your keener-eared listeners will know that I have a bit of an Essex accent, which I try and smooth out so that people who speak a different language can hear me clearer. I'm here with somebody that when I read her book, I thought, oh my God, we've been separated from birth. I'm here with Carol Donaldson with her book, The Volunteers. Carol, it's so nice to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you. It's lovely to be talking to somebody else with an Essex accent. I can express myself properly and you'll understand me.
Totally. And I can stop trying to say my THs and go, what I think is, because that's the true me, right? But Carol, I think we should start by that old cliche on a podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself to start with. So who are you?
Oh, so I am Carol. I am an Essex girl. I always say I'm from the part of Essex that Essex denies. From Havering originally. So I've been working in wildlife conservation for a very long time now, 30 years. And started, I think, exactly the same way as you. Thought that I was going to have a different career. I was going to work in the music industry, and then didn't really know what I wanted to do. And it was actually my ex, who I talk about in my book, who actually gave me one of the best bits of advice. He said, "What were you really into when you were a child?" And I said, I was just into wildlife. I just read nothing but nature books. And he said, well, why don't you go off and volunteer somewhere and see if you're still into it? And I went up to Loch Garten, the RSPB reserve, and did an osprey nest watch for 2 weeks. And just like you, I just loved it. I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do. And I was so enthusiastic at talking to people about the birds and so that sort of just started me on this kind of long now career of trying to make the world a better place for nature and wildlife, really.
And not just for nature and wildlife, but for people. Because this book, The Volunteers, is a memoir of your early career. So I want to start out, and you're in a bit of a hard place. So I think you're in your 30s, are you? Are you in your early 30s at the beginning of the book?
Yeah, I'm in my mid 30s when I wrote when the book's set. Not when I wrote the book, but when the book's set, I was in my mid 30s.
Yeah, when the book's set.
Not in the best of places. I'd been made redundant. My very long-term relationship had broken down, and I was living in this. I always think of the Jam song, who sang about living in a freezing cold flat with damp on the walls. So that's where I was at the time, overlooking this really rough pub. So it was a bit of a low spot for me when I took the job that led on to me running the volunteer group.
So I love the account of this volunteer group you went to work for before, where you stay in a caravan. That the guy who said, oh, you can come and work for me and volunteer for the summer, but you won't survive the caravan. Tell us about that particular nature reserve and the caravan that you lived in.
that was just, I think it's funny sometimes. Sometimes you can pursue one particular dream. And I'd gone, just before that, I'd gone and worked in the Arctic, and I'd always wanted to go and work in the Arctic. And I thought that I
Oh,
was going to go
wow.
and, yeah, no, I've done quite a lot of nice adventurous travel.
Yeah.
So I worked in the Arctic. I kind of went there to find myself. Then I'd gone off, and this all sounds very exciting, but I'd gone off to Russia and worked on a wolf project in Russia.
Oh,
And
my goodness.
this was, yeah, this was, they were a really exciting conservation. And the Russian one was a conservation project. The Arctic one, I was working in a school at the time. But like I'd had this really exciting, adventurous time. It was amazing. But somehow volunteering for 2 weeks on a reserve in, not 2 weeks, sorry, I was there, sorry, 3 months. 3 months on this reserve in Tring, living in this caravan. That was the life-changing experience. And I think sometimes you can pursue something and you think this is the trip of a lifetime. But sometimes the thing that just creeps up on you can be life-changing. And so I went to work, volunteer at this amazing reserve. The man that set it up, Graham Atkins, was just an inspirational man. And he was a lorry driver for a cement company, but he had a lifelong passion for nature. He was a good botanist, and he persuaded the cement company that when the quarry came to the end of its life, that he would, they shouldn't just return it to farmland, they should turn it into a nature reserve. And that kind of shows you the force of his personality, that he managed to persuade
Yeah.
his as the truck driver that delivered to the cement works, he managed to persuade them all to turn this place into a nature reserve. And he'd dedicated his whole life to creating this really unique, quirky nature reserve that was great for wildlife, but it had all these unusual things about it. It had what in those days was quite unusual, a secondhand bookshop. It had chickens, it had guinea
Yeah.
pigs, it had
Yeah.
little comedy touches. It had Wallace and Gromit. It had, I remember there were two pigs sunbathing on the embankment that he did, a little model that he'd found somewhere. So it wasn't po-faced. It wasn't probably even very professional at times, but it had character in spades, and he had character in spades. And I went to stay there. I was staying in a caravan on the edge of the quarry, which had no running water, and an outside loo, and it was quite basic. And I was living there on my own on the edge of this quarry, and I was nervous, and I remember,
Yeah.
but I was also very stubborn, and so was Graham. And I remember he said to me right at the start, he said, "Oh, you won't last." And I thought, I will last. And
Yeah.
it was a magical place. And I don't think I've ever worked harder or been more motivated than to work for him. He just was a really inspiring character.
I love the fact throughout the book you sometimes say, well, what would Graham do? Or you go back to him in difficult times. I don't you think it's beautiful in life that, well, let's face it, it's not straightforward, but you have these people come into your life and it's almost like they're guides. Don't you think that he really
I
showed you the way?
think sometimes when I've thought about Graham's influence, I think about Harry Potter and Dumbledore. Not
Yeah.
that either one of us was that magical, but I think he's that kind of. I was like, he could do no wrong. I think for me, he wasn't a perfect person, as Dumbledore isn't in the books. He wasn't perfect. Not everybody liked him, but we had a real meeting of personalities that just worked. I think. And I could probably take some of his more, I don't know, spiky sides of him. It didn't bother me. So yeah, I think, yeah, it was very much kind of like I was his acolyte in some ways, and just took a lot from him, and the way that he not only was this inspirational person that created this nature reserve, but the way that he inspired other people, and the way that he managed the volunteers, including me, that worked for him. I felt really valued by him, and I think that was a lesson that really struck home with me, and I tried to carry on when I ran my own group.
Excellent. So after that, you went to work for someone else. So tell us about your next job move. And that's really the nub of the book. So listeners, this book, it carries you through. There's quite a bit, will they, won't they, as well? But let's start with your, which we'll come to later. But tell us about your next role and your next boss, which presumably you've changed his name.
Yes, I have. So Graham in the book is called Graham. I
Yes.
wanted him to be known. So I should say that it wasn't directly the job that I got after I worked. So the reserve I worked at with Graham was called College Lake. And after that, I went to work for the RSPB, and I write about that experience in a previous book called On the Marshes. So after I got made redundant from the RSPB, then I was in this sort of difficult place. My money was running out. I wasn't living in very good circumstances. I was all at sea because my relationship had broken up. And then I saw this job, which sounded amazing on paper and was a really good opportunity. And part of it was running this volunteer group. And so I went to work for a man that I call Kirk in the book. And he was a very different kind of boss. I'll be quite diplomatic about the situation, but he was very different. He was in different circumstances. It was a time when there wasn't much. All the budgets were being cut in conservation. It was at the start of the austerity years. So he was struggling for money, and he did keep the ship afloat, and I think he deserves credit for that. But whereas me and Graham, we just really bounced off of each other, and he gave me a very free rein, and so did my boss at the RSPB. With Kirk, it was a very tight rein, and I kicked out about that. I mean, I work for myself now, and there's reasons for that.
Oh,
I'm good at
well, can
working
I
for
just
myself.
say, oh my goodness, this is another thing I felt about the book was sometimes, we just think, oh, I really identify with your situation. Let's just say I've had bosses and I've not easily fit into organisations. And if I don't lead, I leave. Not sure I like that about myself, but there were so many things about that character that reminded me of somebody I've had in my life that was really, really important in my life, and I'm forever grateful for that person. Oh my God, it wasn't easy and it was strange. And it was strange also. I mean, the office environment, perhaps you can just paint a visual and emotional picture of your office environment at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who works in conservation isn't expecting, or certainly in the past wasn't expecting pristine conditions. So I'd worked in offices that were porter cabins and had mice in them and things
Mm.
before, but this was a different step up. So the roof, just every rainstorm, the roof leaked. There was buckets propped all over the carpet, on the top of the computers, on top of the photocopier, catching the raindrops coming from the roof. There was mold everywhere. It was a really unhealthy and pretty dismal place to work. It was an outside toilet that didn't flush half the time. The tea room where I used to have to make all the volunteers tea was like overrun with mice, and the water barely worked, and there was no lighting, and so it was. I mean, the office conditions were awful.
Yeah.
And I was used to roughing it, but it was. I think the porter cabin, which has collapsed since, is almost a character in itself. It's
Yeah.
it was such a living organism with all the mold and the mushrooms and the flies, and that it almost became a breathing entity in itself, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've worked in some very strange environments, and I certainly learnt the evolution of the smells of decaying dead rats and mice in one place that I worked, and think, yep, week two.
It's camembert
And
cheese. I always
I
think of it as
know,
camembert cheese. Is that particularly rich smell And I can't,
Yes.
camembert cheese, unfortunately, always reminds me, this is probably pretty disgusting for your podcast, but it's the smell
Oh
of
no, we love
dead rats in
disgusting.
the wall.
Yeah, yeah, it is. We know that one. Um, so aside from the sort of office environment, where there was a clear direction and tasks of what you had to do, but you really grabbed the job with full hands for the volunteering. So I love the way that you describe this band of volunteers. And isn't that just so great about we get all sorts of people? Would you like to take the listeners through the sorts of characters that you worked with the volunteer and who they were?
Um, I think anyone who's been on a volunteer group would recognise some of the characters. So one of the characters I talk about is Roy, and I should say all their names have been changed. So Roy is a really inspirational, sprightly pensioner who's always learning new things and, you know, is very culturally aware and always taking up new hobbies and is enthusiastic about everything in life. He does a lot of cycling around Germany and swimming off of a coast at the moment. So he was, lots of them were really inspirational, I think. So Roy is this enthusiastic, but also very kind man who takes me under his wing a little bit. Then I've got to remember what their names are in the book. I've just got to be careful not to say their real names. So then there's Val. Val was a very strong-minded woman who I admire. She didn't suffer falls. She sometimes said things that would let tumbleweeds cross the room. She didn't mind about saying things that if she felt it was the thing to say, she would say it. She was a very strong woman. When I first joined, she was the only woman in the volunteer group. And so I've been holding her own really for some time. But she was also very kind, great cake maker. Then there was Jim, who I really wanted his approval because he was the kind of unofficial leader and had the respect of all the other men in particular. Then I had two people on the group who were taught me a lot actually, and both of them had brain injuries, but for different reasons. So they're Alex and Bastian in the book. And I had never really worked with people with that kind of injury before. So that was a real learning curve. And they had obviously they had different personalities. They were different people. But they both contributed. Alex was quite lazy, but was funny. And I kind of admired that he was not going to change the person he was because of this injury or not going to be kowtowed, by it. So I admired that. And Bastian was just someone who was up against a lot of physical and mental difficulties, but just gave everything that he could, and was very hardworking and always eager to please. Yeah, and then we had two people who were very into kind of not Extinction Rebellion at the time because it didn't exist at that time, but were very active Greenpeace protesters, and we were always slightly worried that they would go off and be arrested and not come back. But I think we all admired their real dedication to what they believed in. So there was this great range of people, but I think on any volunteer group you get these characters. So hopefully, although it's my volunteer group, it's something that I think that a lot of people could read and think, oh yeah, I feel like I know that person. They're on my group that I'm in or was once in. So yeah, hopefully it's a kind of universal volunteer group in many ways.
I really like that. So you've got real diversity within the group. And I think back to my own time when I volunteered, a lot in my late teens, early 20s. And then I had the privilege of running volunteer groups about 10 years ago for a few years for a hospital, Woodland, actually Broomfield Hospital in Essex. And I worked with MenCap. They were just amazing. And like you, I learnt from the clients of MenCap about ways of doing and ways of seeing, and the benefits to all of us for working together, and all sorts of different volunteers. And I'll be honest, when I was volunteering at that time as a student, there was always a little bit of romance. I got to be honest about that. That was quite fun. But tell us about some of the tasks and the habitats that you worked in with the
Oh,
volunteers.
so one of the great things about the group, it wasn't on one set site. So we went out to different sites pretty much every week. So it kept people interested. We did lots of work in rivers at the time, and we all actually really enjoyed that. There's a particular pleasure on a hot day of being in a river almost at eye level with the wildlife. And we did lots of scrub cutting in the winter. So I think it always gets to this time of year. And, I think I should be out there. I should be, whatever the weather, bent down double with my boat, or, either coppicing in the woodlands, or scrub cutting on grasslands, and, the smell of those smoky bonfires. So I really
Oh, I
miss
love
all of
that.
that. Lots of things that I miss about being out with that group every week. So it was a real mixed bag of habitat. Sometimes we worked by the sea. We'd cut scrub on the hillsides overlooking the sea to protect particularly rare plants, which some people didn't always agree with us doing. But you got to
No,
believe.
no, you. Yeah, sorry, I just remember a bit in the book
That's
of a
not-
very haughty lady walking by going, stop that now,
My
this
husband is
instant.
a
Do you hear me?
magistrate. That's
Yeah,
what we,
that's
because we,
right.
I'm afraid we still laugh about her when I go out and see the
Yes,
volunteers. Then we still recount this. My husband's a
yeah,
magistrate. I'm going to rouse him from my chambers.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can't tell people. You know that you're doing the
No,
right thing, or at least you believe you're doing the right thing.
yes,
But yeah, there's going to be people who see you cutting down trees or burning things and think it's destruction. And
yeah,
you can't, you can try to tell them and explain to them the reasons that you're doing it, but you've got to accept that some people are going to disagree. And that lady,
yeah.
she cared, she cared and I cared. And so really we were on the same side, but she just had got it in her head that I was doing something illegal, and therefore she was gonna get her husband, that was the magistrate, never came back, thankfully. Or maybe he did, but we're packed up and got home for the day. So
Yeah. You talked a lot about sort of caring for the volunteers and their emotional and social needs. And you also write very movingly about loneliness, which I think is beautifully written. But how you sort of turned that around for yourself. Tell us about your emotional growth and social growth during the time of volunteering.
yeah, I mean, I was at a dark place. I wouldn't put a label on that, because I feel that people that really have like clinical depression, that's a different, that's
Mm,
an illness that I thankfully can't claim. But I was just in, as lots of people can be, especially following a relationship breakup. I didn't feel that I knew
mm,
many people. The people that I did know, because of my previous job, were all married men, happily married men, and so
yeah.
weren't available for me to go out with a weekend. And I was very, very lonely, and obviously suffering from the real loss of a long relationship with someone that I thought was my best friend.
Yeah.
Um, so it was a dark time, and partly when I took the job, I was really hoping that I was going to get new colleagues, that we'd make friends, and for various reasons that didn't really happen. But then I
Mm,
found this group of people, and every week that I was out with them, even though I was very sad a lot of the time, in the days that I was out with the volunteer group were the days that I was laughing, and I forgot about all my things that were actually going on in my life. And I just thought, I've just had a really lovely day with lovely people. And,
yeah.
although most of those people were either much older than me or much younger than me, it didn't matter. They were people that
Yeah.
accepted me for who I was, who I could be myself with, who, we turned into a real community and sense of family that supported each other and continue to support each other through all sorts of things in life. We're still in touch, all of us, on a regular basis, and that is extended beyond that volunteer group. So they just put me back on my feet, really, from a low time in my life. Suddenly, I had this group of people that I was doing things with socially, and we did a lot of fun things socially outside of the group. And I think at the time, I'd thought that, I'd had this relationship breakup, and I thought the answer was I must find another relationship. But what I really needed was support and fun and, to feel accepted. And that is what I found with that group.
Yeah, no, I love that. And also, well, first of all, I'd like to say that where else in life there aren't many situations where you can truly mix as an equal with a group of very disparate people, different ages, different backgrounds, different sort of talents. There aren't many places. Like, for example, after this, I'm going to yoga, and it's a lady of a certain age, middle class, sort of yoga ladies. It's all very nice. It's open to everybody, but that's who goes where I live. Aside from sort of like religious organisations, perhaps, and there'll be other sports things, but mostly groups socially tend to be self-selecting and similar people. Would you say that volunteering is something that smashes through that and we all benefit because of that?
I made a very conscious, and probably, I don't know whether it was unethical or illegal or what, but I didn't really care. I made an effort to try to make that group as diverse as possible. I think I quite
Yeah.
early on saw the benefits of younger people and older people working alongside each other, the joint benefits of that. And so I did make an effort to keep quite a mix of people within the group. I wouldn't say that it was as diverse as it in some ways I would have liked it to be. It wasn't a microcosm of the whole of society. We didn't. We had uh, uh, not a great ethnic diversity, and obviously that is a real issue in conservation. And
Mm.
we also didn't have a great class diversity because, and I've questioned this quite a lot, why people that join volunteer groups are often, especially retired people, often from professional classes and not from, what would have traditionally been a working class. And it's hard to know why that is. So potentially, if you've done a manual job all your life, then you don't necessarily want to go and retire and do more manual work. Or
Yeah.
maybe if most people in that group are from a professional background, then you don't feel that you fit. I don't know. I'm not a sociologist, but I did consciously try to make it as diverse as was possible from the kind of people that were coming to me and wanted to volunteer, and very consciously kept that mix of ages because I just felt that it was a healthy thing for everybody involved and a learning experience both for young people and the older people. And there was all these unlikely friendships that came from it.
Yes.
I say about the woman that had not long come out of prison and
Oh, I love
got
her.
on particularly well. Yeah, I'm glad that people love her. I'm really glad that she comes across so positively. I wanted that for her. But she befriended a lady who was on part-time hours as a solicitor at the time, and you think
Yes.
it's a very unlikely friendship, but they met on equal levels. And it was actually one of the
Yeah.
volunteers, Roy, who said that even though everybody was coming from different parts of the city, when they met in that car park, everybody looked the same. Everybody was there for the same reason. Everybody pretty much was on the same level playing field. And that's got to be a positive way to start your day, really.
I think that's a lesson for society. But also I love the visual image of, I mean, crikey, I can relate to this, being all sort of scruffy with holes and burns in your clothes and actually on YouTube. Don't forget we're on YouTube, Tree Lady Talks. Noel's going to put up some photographs of me as a volunteer when I was much younger, and there may be some more images there as well for you to have a look at, of volunteering in general. So I love that. But also you write about the young lady, is it Bella, who was a prisoner? Yeah, former prisoner, befriending a very timid, nervous young lady in her early 20s and painfully shy, and how you actually, Carol, helped to bring her out of her shell, and you started social evenings and things, and that was all wonderful. So, yeah.
I think
But I don't know
I
if you
should
want
say
to
I think a
expand
lot
upon
of
that.
members of the group helped to bring her out. I think there was a lot of kindness towards her,
Yes.
and again that acceptance, of who she was. And the other thing that I found with conservation, that it allowed people, if people wanted to talk, they could talk. But if she's called Josie in the book, if she wanted to go off and just chop down trees and get something out of her system, then everybody was going to kind of understand that and not get in
Yeah.
her face too much. And so I think that helped. And Bella, was particularly sensitive to her feelings and kind of just instinctually knew when to ask and when not to ask what was wrong. And, because she'd really struggled with her own mental health, she had much better handle on how to manage that than I did. I had no training in how to deal with mental health issues. I was just, an average person who cared about these people and did my best. And sometimes I got it right and sometimes I probably didn't get it right, but I think if you genuinely care and you're genuinely trying to help, then that's got to translate positively to the person that's struggling, I think.
Definitely. And you did have some challenges with a couple of the volunteers and some very sad times with dear Bastian,
Yeah,
didn't you?
that's a bit of a spoiler, isn't it?
Well, we
I think.
won't say anything about that. We're going to
Yeah.
leave the listeners to do that, because the other, I'm not going to be a spoiler, with any memoir, this really turns the pages. So this is such a warm and engaging read, but there is a will they, won't they, bit of romance running through this book as well, isn't there?
There is, yeah. I mean, obviously, I'd come out of this long-term relationship, and I was so naive, and at sea, and then this. I didn't like him to begin with, but he was, to my mind, a very handsome guy of the same age who was on the group, and there was, a very obvious spark between us. It probably wasn't very professional because I'm sure the other volunteers were aware that, I was kind of like, oh yes, we'll go off and do this footpath work together. But I was human, and so was he, and we kind of, I really appreciated his support, but there was certainly, it did me the world of good. He wasn't necessarily the easiest person. He wasn't necessarily who you choose for a healthy relationship, but I will never say that he didn't do me good, because it was nice to be flirted with by a very handsome. He had a beautiful speaking voice. It's quite the opposite of me. He just made everything sound like it
No.
had been. Well, I think so, but he made everything sound like it had been coated in honey. It was like, I don't care what you say, even if you're talking rubbish to me.
Yeah.
I don't care because you sound so beautiful. So yeah, I'm
Well,
still clearly quite
yeah,
giggly about him.
that's all right. I mean, I remember volunteering for a month. So when I was 18, I'd completed my first year of my degree at Dorset Institute, as it was then, and in sort of geography and landscape studies. And I was going out with a guy when I was in my first year, and I found out 2 days before we were due to go around Europe on our own as a couple that he was two-timing me. I mean, the
Oh
indignity.
no! Oh
So I
no!
thought, right, okay. I was really heartbroken actually, but I thought, you know what? I've got my ticket. So I went interrailing on my own for a month,
Oh,
but
good
I
for
thought to
you.
fill the time, I booked 2 weeks on a Dutch organic farm. I mean, this, listeners, was 1986. 2 weeks on a Dutch organic farm. Then I met a lovely lady, and we'd hitchhiked through Germany and Holland. And my God, did we have some narrow escapes?
Oh,
It was
crikey, yeah.
outrageous, really. But we got away with it. We ended up in the back of a Moroccan traveling family with a very decorative interior of a van doing, oh, goodness knows, 90 miles an hour down the Autobahn. And there were
Exciting.
many adventurers with men who, thank goodness, we got out in time. And so that was fun. But then I stayed for 2 weeks, and 2 months, and my last month was on a work camp volunteering in the French Alps in a tiny village. And my Interrail ticket had run out 2 days before the actual camp started. And I thought it doesn't matter because I'd learned to sleep rough, because I slept rough in a flower bed in Monte Carlo, etc. And I learned to manage.
Wow, what
But
an
when I got
adventure.
there, well, nothing compared to you, Carol.
No,
But
no, I
when
don't.
I
I
got there,
disagree. You were much braver than me. I wouldn't have
well,
done
I was
that.
rather
You know,
foolish.
much braver.
Well, I mean,
I mean,
as I
all
sort
of
of
you.
caught this, oh, don't be daft. As I caught the train to Grenoble, which I know I'm saying wrong. Then I caught a tiny, tiny train on a single track, and we wound our way through the mountains. And I began to get increasingly nervous, because I thought, I don't think there's going to be much of a station that I can sleep at. Where am I going to sleep? Because I didn't have a tent. And so I started to gabble in rubbish French, and I ended up staying at the mayor's house in the village with this extended family, and it was all wonderful 2 days. And then I stayed for a month on this camp with 25 people from around the world. It was awesome. But there was a guy, and we didn't have a romance. I actually had a romance with the local postman on that one. And had a
This is your
motorbike.
book.
And
You writing this
I
book.
know, sorry,
This is a
I
great
know, I
book.
know. Anyway, but what reminds me of Laurie, who is the character in your book, was that Laurie sang, and a guy on the work camp sang beautifully, and he introduced me to Joni Mitchell, who is one of a
Ah,
lady of a certain age, love of my life. And so, yes, there's always somebody like that who
oh,
sort of
anyway,
shows you a
I'm
new
so hooked on
way.
your story. So romantic.
Well, I had no money, and I actually broke my shoes. So I remember then catching the coach from Grenoble back to the ferry crossing, and then on to Colchester, all barefoot, and then catching a bus to my village where my parents still live. They lived
You
in
were that age.
caravans. I don't know. And my parents lived in really awful caravans because they built their own house, and it were really run down. And I walked the sort of mile from the bus stop to my mum and dad's. I'm an only child, and of course there was no mobile phones, so I was phoning up once a week, going, "I'm in Switzerland, I'm in Italy,"
Yeah,
and
yeah. With
I'll never forget
all the
that.
coins going in the phone box.
I
That's what you
know,
used to have to
yeah, that's
do.
right. So
Get a
just
big
yeah, still
roll of
alive, still
coins
alive.
and put them in like crazy. Yeah.
I know, that was
And you
it.
want
That
to
was it.
Plotlands. Were your family plot? Sorry, I shouldn't be talking, but your family
You can talk.
Plotlanders, are they? You
No,
were on
they're
a
not
Plotland.
actually. And
Oh no,
no,
okay.
they weren't. This was in a little village north of Colchester, and my dad decided, and my mum and dad decided that they would have an adventure. My dad said, "I think I can build a house myself in the evenings, getting books from the library, because there was no internet." So he worked full time during the day for British Telecom, and then he would come home, and it took him 3 years, and he did it. And it's a very nice bungalow, and they're still in it.
Oh, this is an
And
amazing
yeah,
story.
yeah, it is actually. They're amazing that they did that. And so there were sort of two big chunks of volunteering I did, but my main volunteering was the Trust for Conservation Volunteers, and I learned
Hmm.
loads and loads of skills. But what I love about going back to you, enough of me. I mean, it's outrageous. I just took over the podcast.
I want to read
But
your book though about traveling around Europe. I found this is a great adventure. I want to read that book.
oh, I hadn't thought about that. Some hairy moments, but mostly generosity. I will say this actually, which speaks to what you're saying about in your book, the generosity and kindness of strangers and the
Mm,
generosity and kindness of people in a group situation. And I was shown so much love and ultimately
mm,
felt quite looked after.
mm,
Um, so I think that what you do in this book is you really inspire people on how to care for a volunteer group. So
mm.
if someone's listening to this and they either volunteer or are thinking of running a volunteer group, what are the top tips that you would give somebody who's perhaps starting out in a job like yours and how to do it well?
I think that you've got to understand the reasons that people volunteer, that it's not just coming out to do work for you for free, that they're coming out for a social experience, a fulfilling experience, to feel they're doing something of worth. So I think to give them tasks that help them feel that they've achieved something at the end of the day. I think to give people respect that they might well have been doing the job a lot longer than you, and not dictate to them or talk down to them. I've seen all of these things happen on volunteer groups. Um, I think also that extends to, turning up on time, being organised, having thought through how you're going to run the task, because people are giving up their time for free. They turn up in all weathers. At early in the morning, they've got lives as well to lead. So it's that level of respect. I think, well, what do I think? I think lots of things, to be honest. I think that you've maybe got to be aware when people are not having a good day, and how to deal with that. You are bringing out sometimes groups of people that have got certain vulnerabilities, so you need to maybe be conscious that it can't just be do this fencing and now we'll go home. That to foster that group of caring about those people, I think that can go a long way. And also to show your appreciation, to always thank people, to maybe do some little extras. We used to do this Christmas party every year, and I'd put quite a lot of effort into that. And it was available for everyone. It was free for everybody, and it was very simple. It was very basic, but it was something that I put effort in, and to show my huge appreciation for these people that had given me their time throughout the year and supported me as well. So I could probably go on and on about things, how to run a volunteer group. Like I say, I didn't do it perfectly. I got things wrong. I got the hump with people, and felt exhausted and didn't always want to deal with their problems. It was a long, hard physical day often. But I do see people take groups of volunteers out and just think that about the job, that we've got to do this job, and these people are my tools to do the job with, and not give them that respect or understanding that they want to get other things out of it. They will work really, really hard for you. And we sometimes did long days, and we sometimes worked in horrendous weather. And I was always amazed on a really rainy day. I had to be there. I was paid to be there. But you've got to give people something more. If they're going to turn up, why should they turn up in the pouring rain to work for free if they don't have to, unless they're getting something really fulfilling out of it that feels worthwhile to them? They're giving something, but they need to get things back out of it as well. So yeah, I do see some bad practice running volunteer groups, and yeah, like I say, I didn't always get it perfect, but I did try very hard to make a good experience for people.
And if someone's listening to this podcast, because I know that some people listen and they're thinking of perhaps going into industry, or they just want to know more about this sort of world, how might volunteering help them have a glimpse into the world of nature and conservation?
I think that for me, and it sounds like for you as well, it often can give you that first taster to see whether you really actually want this as a career. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's working outdoors in all weathers, and not everybody wants to do that. Sometimes it's working in slightly ramshackle conditions. And, sometimes people have got visions of what it's going to be like, and the reality is quite different. So I think it can be quite handy to get that sort of taste of what it's going to be like. And also it can give you the organisation that I ran the volunteer group for was quite a small organisation, and I really, obviously I was employed by them, but I really benefited from being in a small organisation because it gave me a chance to take on jobs and learn things that I never would have done if I'd worked for, say, the RSPB, who I respect and, I'm proud that I still as a freelance work for them. But there were so many experts in an organisation like that I never would have been thrown in the deep end in the way that I was with this organisation. And recently I'm just taken on in the last week a young woman that's going to do a bit of volunteering with me. She's got a lot of academic experience, been a researcher on bumblebees, and I'm sure I can learn a huge amount from her, but she's got no practical experience, and so I can give her quite a range of tasks and the benefits of my dubious wisdom, maybe. So I think if you're looking at it as a career, there's that aspects of it. I think if you're looking at it because you want to give something back to nature, or you want to be out working with your hands outdoors, or you feel lonely and you think it might be a nice way to meet people, I think definitely do it. It can provide so much on so many levels, and I think until you're out doing it, until I ran that volunteer group, maybe I didn't really know how much that I would get out of it. And even though I've written a whole book on the matter, it's something that sometimes is very hard to put your finger on as to why you leave being with a volunteer group like that and feel so much more centered and sure of yourself and happier all round. How that experience can give you that, I still don't totally understand, but I suppose I've tried to express that in the book, what it gave me, what it gave the other volunteers, and hopefully what it could give other people as well, how it can be such an enriching life experience.
I think one of the things that's enriching about it is the fact that it can be quite challenging. We talked about the weather, I know that for myself, and physically demanding. Then there's a physical exercise, there's the socialization, but you as a leader were doing very many different sorts of tasks. I mean, water vole habitat, water vole counting, restoring the riverbank, scrub bashing, etc. So I think anything that's challenging is worthwhile doing, isn't it? Otherwise we just don't learn.
And I'd wake up in the morning and look out the window and it would be pouring of rain. I think, I reckon this is going to be a rough old day. But you'd get all your waterproofs on, you'd go out, you'd attempt to get a bonfire going. We never failed. We always got a bonfire going somehow. Yeah. And suddenly the weather was an outside thing, and you were just having a great time, whatever the weather, really. So it was exhausting. I mean, Val, I used to have to drive a long journey and then offload all the tools in the pitch black in this terrible conditions, and then have a long commute home as well. And so Val would give me all these really sugary toffees to keep me awake on the journey home. So sometimes it was exhausting. And I always joked, it was on a Thursday, the volunteer group, and I always joked that even if Keanu Reeves asked me out for dinner on Thursday night, I'd have to say no because I was just too shattered. So Keanu lost his chance.
Oh, well, listeners, I highly recommend this book, The Volunteers by Carol Donaldson. It's just such a warm and engaging read. It's also informative. There's things to learn about nature, of course, but I think there's more to learn about life. And I think you're incredibly brave. I think you are charming and you write in such an engaging way. Carol Donaldson, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you very much.